Hey, good afternoon. Wait for some people to join us. Today, I am going to talk about this article I found. It is in a thing called, it's God and Radicals Press, and the website is abeautifulresistance.org. And it is called The Future is Fascist. Maybe it's a little dark. Maybe it's just reflective of my mood, which is a little dark, so to speak. Uh, it's hot today. It's about 85 degrees on October 1st in western New York, hence the iceberg because of the cooling effect. I hope you don't hear the fan. If you do, let me know. And I'll say hi to Marcia. Let's see what color you guys turn up. Yellow today. Hi, Marcia and Kim. I'm glad you guys joined me. It's okay if we'll see what happens. But this article, the guy is, let me go all the way down and then I'll tell you his name is, oh geez, I went too far. Ride Wildermuth, and he's a druid and a writer, as well as a co-founder of Gods and Radicals Press. And then they have his information, and I put the link in. But this was originally, I found it on Nina Parker's Facebook page. I think she posted it. Nina Parker's a wonderful person. She lives out in the West, and I'm lucky enough that I have met her and hugged her in the flesh. And her site is Whistling in the Dark. She's amazing. I love Nina. Hi, Chris. Hot there, cold here. It is ridiculously hot, but I was outside. I needed to do this, which is a diversion, because I've been in, what's my usual, guys? But this week, it's been just absolutely horrible. I can't do anything. So I'm going to read because I found this. Drink my vitamin water. And let's get going. I'm not reading the whole thing. It is really super long. But it's good. And again, the link is in there. So I'll read the first chapter and then I'm going to skip down. The abrupt appearance of fascist, ultra-nationalist, racial separatist, and authoritarian movements throughout the world in the last 5 years and their success in coming to power through democratic electoral processes is truly terrifying. At no time since the 1930s have we seen not only a comfort, but a deep lust for authoritarianism in so many people, closed borders, immigration raids, direct and brutal violence against, excuse me for a second, against, oh darn it, against political opposition, flagrant displays of racism and male chauvinism, popular referendums towards national separatism, and an almost jubilant erosion of and revocation of civil protections for minorities. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I got to make sure we went live, and you are live. You're with me, so here we are. Okay, good deal. It's like control central. All right, that was pretty good opening. So he goes down and he talks about the rise of fascisms, and he does a lot of historical stuff in this, okay? But I cannot get to it all. I'll never be able to sit through it all. I wish I could. Hey, Kent, how are you? So that was the opening. That was the opening paragraph. So he goes through, and he's talking about the narratives we believe, that almost like that this impending fascism around the world is just something brief and something fleeting, and oh my God, it's just like a temporary situation. And he explains why maybe it's not. And he calls it a beautiful, comforting narrative. It offers hope to those directly suffering from the violence and all these temporary, these terrible things, and calling it a temporary setback. And the next chapter is the myth of social progress. And he says, fascism is the new normal. And he says, he talks about, while a gay person could get married in the United States in 2019, but not in 2000, that same gay person's ability to support themselves, get housing, healthcare, eat, etc., has not gotten easy. So he goes through some history, he goes through current events, and it's really, really good. It is. And then the next chapter is the rise of the tongue twister, authoritarian surveillance state. Really good. He talks about China. Maybe I'll read this one here. He talks about the past. He talks about, for instance, the longest state of emergency in France was declared at least 6 times by a socialist president. He said that all these things, the rise of all of this surveillance stuff has happened in the last few decades. He said under all, a lot of different, like it could be under liberals. He talks about that we should note that these were all leaders generally seen as the champion of civil rights. Both Hollande and Obama presided over governments that allowed safe-sex marriage. So he goes on and he talks about this, and it's really fascinating. But I want to get down to what I think will interest all of us here. And this is the beginning. More terrifying, the very resources upon which our existences rely have become increasingly scarce. Catastrophic climate change isn't stopping or even slowing, it's accelerating. More species die each year than the previous. CO2 levels in the atmosphere continue to climb. Disruptions to major weather patterns trigger increasing heat waves, storms, and floods. All this puts additional pressure upon the poor across the earth, creating food, water, and energy crises that threaten the stability of governments everywhere. Fascism and the climate crisis. Therein, though, is the hint as to what is actually behind the increasing authoritarian trends, whether these be state-led or populist. Because fascism is a reaction after all, but not a reaction against an aesthetic increase in social rights for select minorities. Instead, it is a reaction towards emergency. That's what's happening. He says it's a reaction after all, but not a reaction against an aesthetic increase in social rights, which is what we all think. Fascism, by which I mean authoritarianism, is a way of managing civilizations during emergencies. Laws against dissent or political opposition during wartime, for example, are justified as necessary because the very existence of government is under threat from foreign powers, real or is in the cast of the wars against terrorism, mostly manufactured and imaginary. During both world wars, the United States and all other major governments involved in the war implemented increased surveillance. Incarcerated or interned entire people groups and harshly prosecuted property crimes and other offenses by the poor. Similarly, in the last 2 decades, authoritarian power grabs in response to terrorism, such as the Patriot Act in the United States, were used to prosecute environmentalists, war dissenters, civil rights activists, a practice that continues up to the present day. Standing Rock, and even things that are currently happening. So if this increasing trend towards authoritarianism throughout the world is a reaction to an emergency, we must ask ourselves what that emergency is. Hence, we need to drop all pretenses that our liberal democracies are marching towards some utopian future of equality, or that there is any real progress being made to better our material conditions. Instead, we are forced to look at those very material conditions themselves and realize that they actually cannot get better. Several hundred years ago, the way most humans had lived, relatively unchanged for thousands of years, shifted abruptly with the birth of factories and the exploitation of coal and oil. This led to explosions in population growth, accompanied by massive deforestation, desertification, and most of all, an exponential growth in carbon dioxide expelled into the air. All of this was seen as progress. The factory was the future. And because the earth on which we live possesses a deep resiliency, few of the effects of this destruction caused became evident until last century, really evident. No one should be surprised that the modern nation state and the birth of surveillance and policing technology also occurred at the exact same time. Such an explosion of economic and population growth required new strategies for maintaining power against the poor, especially since they were promised liberation through the illusions of democracy. Because here we are now, having reached the limits of Earth's resiliency and the resources used to build our civilizations, especially oil. There are no other easily available energy sources to maintain, let alone expand, modern society. And anyways, the time to have transitioned to more sustainable methods was several decades ago. So now, every people group in the world sees the certainty of impending scarcity and in some cases genocide through starvation, flooding, drought, or war. And thank you. Hello, human and natural progressive and married and everybody that's here. User number 2. Every government of the world is now facing the undeniable question: how do we hold on to power in the face of catastrophic climate change? China has already found its answer through increased surveillance and management of its people through a social credit system. In that system, every individual will eventually be tracked according to social, financial, legal, and commercial data and scored accordingly, with a low score, including political dissent or jaywalking too often, barring you from international flights and even economic assistance. Yay, China. While easy to dismiss from an Orientalist standpoint as a dystopian project that cannot happen in the enlightened West, we must remember that such a system doesn't arise out of nothing, nor is it meant to merely punish. The purpose of the social credit system in China is to manage resource availability. People who do not conform to the system lose access to economic goods and mobility itself, and access is granted only to those who conform. Here, we see that China is responding to the same emergency, dwindling resources, to which Emmanuel Macron was responding when he implemented his highly unpopular diesel tax. This tax was born not from a mere desire to punish people, but to avoid an impending petroleum crisis by discouraging people from driving. While the Gilets jaunes protesters in France have many justifiable reasons to criticize Macron's introduction of the environmental measure, the problem remains that France both continues to pump out absurd amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere every year and also faces potential fuel shortages in the next few years. These are far greater crises than an increase in diesel costs. And doesn't France have a lot of nuclear power too? Similar problems are occurring everywhere. Brexit, for all its racist and nationalist rhetoric, was an understandable response for a nation finding its economic power dwindling. Like me. So too the election of Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil and Donald Trump in the United States. Previous center-left governments had failed to address any of the actual impending economic crises and instead relied on political chicanery and heavy doses of optimism to opiate the masses. Germany is also facing a similar situation, with its center-right leader Angela Merkel barely holding on to power against threats from several proto-fascist parties. The situation we are in can perhaps be best seen with Trump's proposed border wall between the United States and Mexico. As awful as Trump is, and as racist as the wall will be, it's too easy to forget the actual logic behind the wall. The point of that wall isn't to keep people out now. It's to keep out the millions of people fleeing drought and starvation due to catastrophic climate change later. It is not about a racist present, but about a fascistic future. With this lens, we can also look at other changes in the way the United States has governed before the current president and see that there's been no interruption at all, only a continuation. President Obama, for all his charming aesthetics of progress, continued and expanded military occupations in the Middle East while increasing the militarization of police in the United States. The answer as to why someone supposedly so committed to equality would do such a thing should now be obvious. The military actions were necessary to ensure the United States had continued access to oil reserves. And the militarization of police was to ensure the government could withstand internal challenges to its sovereignty, including by poor Black people. Shh, don't tell. In our past is our future. By now, perhaps you're wondering why such a longer view isn't included in many of the dominant theories about fascism. In fact, such a view might also strike you as a little too apologetic for these authoritarian impulses. To both of these points, I can only answer by invoking the legacy of two anti-fascist thinkers from the middle of the last century, and that was Georges Bataille and Walter Benjamin. Georges was a French artist and writer who lived through the Nazi occupation of France. Walter was a German Jewish historian and writer who fled through France into Spain, where he died by suicide or potentially by assassination. They were also friends, sharing a passion for mysticism and other heretical ideas that caused them both to be accused of fascism themselves. Bataille's work, his primary work on the subject, the psychological structure of fascism, is almost never quoted in the discourse around fascism. This is unfortunate because, but also unsurprising. Besides being a difficult text, Bataille argues uncomfortably that fascism is a revolutionary force, one that seeks to establish order in times of political crisis in order to perpetuate the order. That is, for Bataille, fascism is a way of renewing a society, of keeping it going, uniting it, and resurrecting it so it can progress into the future. From Bataille's view, Trump's slogan, "Make America Great Again," is not so much about the real past as it is about a utopian future. The rise of fascist movements now can also be seen as not as attempts to return to a mythic past, but to create unity, to survive a tumultuous future. Because of the way he rejected the myth of utopian socialist progress, Bataille's ideas were labeled dangerous and even sympathetic to fascism by others. So too were the ideas of his friend Walter Benjamin, who had the unfortunate distinction of being one of the few men of that time wanted dead by both Stalinists and Nazis for his idea. Imagine that one. Both of them want you. For Benjamin, the rise of fascism was exactly the pull towards the future, which I, the author, suggest we be fearful of. Highly critical of the way that industrialization has changed our conception of reality. For example, through the mechanical reproduction of art, and how it turned politics into aesthetic. Benjamin argued that the progress was not some great destination which we must valiantly march, but a terrible destination over which we have no control. He did make some remarks about a painting that he hid from the Nazis, and I'll let you read that yourselves, because I know that you're all going to want to read this because it's so good. For both Benjamin and Bataille, then, fascism was not a reactionary impulse, nor attempt by those losing power to regain it. Instead, fascism is the inevitable future of civilizations built upon capitalist exploitation of people and the earth. The final point of progress for an industrialized society. And though neither were nearly as aware of how dire the situation in the world is now, their words feel much more prophetic and true than the comforting yet false idea that fascism is merely reaction to social progress. It's not much longer. Their ideas point to an awful truth. It is no coincidence that the authoritarian impulses of governments and people are exploding around us at the very same time that that catastrophic climate change has begun manifesting itself. In fact, the racist, nationalist, and fascist movements that arise everywhere now are a response to the impending resource crises caused by that climate change. Though it is not the future we were promised, nor the progress we were hoping for, this was always the only future that was ever possible for our industrialized civilizations. But this doesn't mean that this is the only future possible for humanity or the earth. There were other futures before, other futures still, but only for different kinds of societies, ones not dependent upon dwindling resources for their perpetual growth. It has always been possible to live without petroleum and coal, without deforestation and extinctions, without international finance, capital, and instant digital commerce, without immigration laws and border walls, without corporate and state surveillance and militarized police. To get to such a future, though, we need to pull the emergency brake on this future now, first. Then we can do the work of remembering how to survive without all these things, the way humans have done for thousands and thousands of years. While the future of our current civilization is fascist, our past is full of other futures, other hopes, and other ways of being with each other. It's to this past we must look, even as the wreckage of history piles up. We must resist the storm of false progress, awaken the dead, and make whole what has been smashed. I don't think the end is hopium. I think the end is good. I want you to read the whole article because I think it's got a lot of history. It's got a lot in it, and he's a great writer. I'm going to learn more about this website, and I thank Nina Parker for this. How you guys doing out there? I see you've got a lot of conversation. Wow. Oh my God. We were never able to sustain such high population levels without oil, and without it, we still would not be able to. Who wants to? I don't mean it to sound, like I'm a nihilist or whatever, but I've been I can say I've seen better days and better years. I guess that's why maybe I'm attracted sometimes to these dark pieces, but they're not dark. Not really. They're realism. These writers are amazing out there. And Newman says the temperature for the future is already set in stone. We will get hotter and many will starve. It's how we live today. That's what we got today, right? We got today. So, as we watch what unfolds in the American media, even, in the European media, I lay around and I look at all these things and we see these games and we see the political sphere, the shitosphere, the doomosphere, the moronosphere, everything you want to sphere it. We're here. We must do what we can, what any of us is capable of. And there you go. Thanks for coming today, guys. Let me see. User 2. Yeah, living organically the way things used to be causes you to do less harm, and that's all you can do as an individual. It's hard. I can't even imagine telling my 31-year-old, you got to give up those creature comforts. I think it's going to be a rude awakening. So I'm leaving you with such a positive spin. Kim, feel better, honey. Kim's off to the surgeon. Thanks for coming. Thank you very much. All right, everybody. I've been on for almost a half an hour. Anybody have anything they want to bring up? I mean, this was a pretty heavy reading. And I completely do. I felt so attracted to it because I've been grappling with the things he brought up. I've been grappling. Is this a reaction to the push for social justice, or is this merely what he says, just the natural end to a capitalist society that's used, abused, and taken advantage of, and it's a fitting goodbye. Everything fits. Peace, guys, and I'm sorry, I don't want to depress you. I'm just giving you a little dose of realism in the afternoon on a hot day, uncharacteristically, unseasonably hot. And I'm not going to stop married. Thank you, Sandy. Keep up the great work and don't stop fighting the good fight. I have so many fights on every front. You know what? I can't, because then I'll lay down, and I'm not ready. Peace, guys. Thank you for coming.